Well, thanks, Lorian. I am extremely proud of Lorian and the Institute. You guys have been going through this 9 months, 10 months, almost a year, and it was a vision before, and it's come to fruition. And so thank you, Lorian, for being the key leader in this. I want to kind of give the applause. And then I just am extremely proud of you, in addition to whatever you've got going during the day and the week, to add a bunch of reading, and then an evening when you get together and debate and discuss and try to grow in your faith. That intentionality is really to be lauded. And you have my complete support for something like this. And then I hope you're excited to know that coming out of about 9 months of discussions by the staff and then by the leadership, lay leadership, the session of the church, we've come up with 4 new sets of goals for the next 5 years. And one of the pillars is really a deep dive into discipleship. How do we form people that are more and more like Christ over time? And so, for instance, Clay and Lorian and others in adult discipleship are working on different pathways for people if you're not a person of faith or brand new to the faith, or seem like you're stagnated or stuck in a certain place in the faith, or in college, there are one-on-one classes. You know, what are the prerequisites for an accounting degree or an engineering degree or a theology degree? You have to take those to then take the level 2s and the level 3s, and then they're graduate courses. And we're going to try to have more and more classes in different of those levels to meet the needs of the different places where our people are that orbit around MDPC. And so you guys are kind of in that 303 or 404 level. You're people of faith that have some gravitas time becoming like Christ, but you really want to go mini seminary or deep intellectually into these items and then talk together and not only understand them with your head, but then kind of put them into play in your heart and let those walk out in how you live out your faith, not only in the church, but then going forward. So a quote that I've always appreciated is, "The heart cannot delight what the mind rejects as false." So we have to understand certain things intellectually for our heart to get passionate or excited. Jesus said a similar thing: love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. See? The head doesn't have to be disengaged from the heart. We don't have to turn off our brain when we come in the church or follow Jesus. Some church traditions say, don't ask questions, don't worry about that. Just listen to what the priest says, or just listen to what Pastor Alf says. Never ponder those things yourself. That's not what Jesus says. Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. We're to be integrated, holistic human beings that don't have to conflict with each other as we follow Jesus, but integrate our faith and our life and our head and our heart. Presbyterians in the Reformed tradition have typically been strong with the head, the intellectual. We sometimes have hard time with the heart. And other traditions are great with the heart and are less strong with the head. So what I'm going to try to do today is at least Clay and a couple people that were in the class wrestled with this postmodernism thing, but then if you're going to do postmodernism, you really have to talk a little bit about modernism or naturalism or materialism. And so I'm going to start with that: materialism, modernism, humanism, and then get to postmodernism. And then if we understand those two, what does it mean to be a Christian with our parents, with our kids, with our friends, with our neighbors? What does it mean to be a church that is addressing a culture that's becoming more and more pluralistic, relativistic, secular? And so I'll try to do some application, and then we'll just open it up to a question. How does that sound? Okay. Let me start with modernity. Any summary is reductionistic, but we've got to get some ground rules and at least a framework, and then we can move to the next. Modernity started around the time of the Enlightenment, so 1650 to 1800. The stage was set in the Renaissance about 100 years before that, which elevated humankind to the center of reality. Before that, in the East and the West, God or gods were at the center of reality, and humans were in response to that. And with the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, the human becomes the center of locus for thinking and behaving and authority. So the individual self is the center. Descartes, in some of your readings, said, I think, therefore I am. I, that's key, and think. If you have both of those in modernity, you have everything. Just for you to know, you read James Sire's chapter on this. I always was troubled with professors that would just go through the chapters that we studied. I read them. Give me some other things than just what the professor and the writer gave. So in addition to what's in Sire, I am referring to Stanley Grentz's A Primer of Postmodernism, and then a book by the Gospel Coalition called Before You Lose Your Faith, Reconstructing Doubt in the Church, that talks about postmodernity and then how do we respond to it. So those are a few books that we're looking at as we talk about this. So I won't just regurgitate the chapter. I'll try to take it on from a little different vantage point, and then hopefully there'll be connection points. Okay, so with Descartes, I think, therefore I am. I is central, and think is central. Newton comes in response, later provided the scientific framework for modernity, picturing the physical world as a machine, the laws and regularity of which can be discovered by the human mind. And the Enlightenment project primarily was a goal to unlock the secrets of the universe in order to master nature for human benefit and for a better world. Okay? Francis Bacon thought that science was the key to happiness. Very optimistic. If we just knew more about the physical world, we could solve all the problems, not only in the world, but in the human sphere as well. Progress is inevitable. Science, coupled with the power of education, will free us from the vulnerability to nature as well as from all social ills and bondage. And so out of that comes the religious understanding of deism, which some of our founding fathers and mothers like Jefferson were most likely deists. Deists believed in God, but more of an idea of God as a watchmaker who set the world in motion, set it and charged it up, and then left the picture for it just to wind on its own. Then further, God gets replaced by humans at the center in the deist world view, where God is really just a name, but not really on the stage, if that's the way to say it. To discover truth became to determine truth, and then with the scientific method, if it can't be replicated or explained by science, it doesn't really exist. That's modernity. Science is great with nature, but not with supernature, not with the supernatural, because God is outside of nature, above nature. So science seeks to describe the forms and processes of the world. It declines to make observations of meaning and value. It's neutral in social, political, religious debates, until recently with all the coronavirus stuff. Then science got co-opted by whatever side you were debating in some of those things. Religion engages the question about life beyond the scope of the scientific method, such as the existence of God, the meaning of life, nature of values. Faith declares that there's more to life than reason. For instance, that there's something like love, which science can't really define fully, explain, replicate. That's not what science was meant to do. But with the deist understanding, with Descartes, I think, therefore I am, with Newton having the framework of modernity, with Bacon saying science was the key to happiness, humans become their own authority. There's no authority outside what can be observed and defined. So you lay aside tradition, religious beliefs. At the extreme, you glorify science, you deify science, and you ignore that science does not answer why we're here. If life has purpose, or what that purpose is, and any of the other fundamental questions that make life worth living. Okay, so an example of that, just modernity is the Sherlock Holmes novels. If you've ever read any Sherlock Holmes, if you apply reason and science, you will solve any mystery. Or, I'll put the cookies on the lower shelf, I grew up with the cartoon Scooby-Doo. Remember that? Scooby-Doo and the Mystery Machine and all those things. There were no real ghosts in any of those episodes. Nothing on the spiritual, nothing on the supernatural plane. There was only good and bad people, and good wins. You unmask what you think is the spiritual and the supernatural, and you find out it's the baker next door, it's the manager of the hotel, it's the person who's been helping you the whole time, and you said, I thought it was her, I thought it was him, but there's nothing supernatural. Everything can be explained naturally once you get to the bottom of it through reason, through science. Or, if you're a Trekkie, the original Star Trek. Now, don't parse this too closely. Just think of the broad sweep. The goal was to boldly go where no man has gone before, and the crew of the Enterprises include persons of various nationalities working together for the common benefit of humankind. One of the heroes of the old Star Trek was Spock. Part human, part Vulcan, but ideal Enlightenment man. Completely rational and without emotion, or he held his emotions in check, and that dispassionate rationality repeatedly provided the key to solving problems encountered by the crew in every episode. Now you say, well, what about Captain Kirk? First, you've got Chekhov and Scotty could solve by technology the machine. They could make sure that the aircraft functioned. But the writers, especially Rottenberry, argued consciously or unconsciously that all of our problems can be solved by the application of rational expertise. That's modernity. The wild card was Captain Kirk. But in most of the episodes, if you go back and watch them, his passions get them into most of the problems that they find themselves in. That's not a good thing. What becomes the good thing, his decisiveness, when he has the data from Spock or from Chekhov or from Scotty, or who was the medical guy, LaHoy, or say it? McCoy. Whenever he had the data that he needed, the science, the information, then he was decisive enough to use it to get themselves out of the problem in the end. But his brashness, his emotion, him being attracted to some of the people on the planet or trying to solve things, got him into most of the problems that they got into. If you think of that show, it's a classic modernity show. Faith in Christ, in that kind of worldview of Sherlock Holmes, Scooby-Doo, original Star Trek, gets replaced by humans as God-like. We don't need God to explain the world we see. Science does that job for us. We don't need God or religion to be moral, to love, and to work for a better world or have meaning and faithfulness, fulfillment in life. What we need is to be free to live life as we see fit. I think, therefore I am. And to work together to make the world a better place. And the locus of authority in modernity is data and the human being. Okay, so that 1600s up to 1800, what went wrong so that we're at a place where we don't trust reason fully? We can't say there's the truth. We only say my truth or our truth or your truth. What happened to move from modernity to postmodernity. And it's not as clean as that. We all have some modernity in us, we have some postmodernity in us, and a variety of other things. But what was the switch? Postmodernity, as Sire says, and Grentz and others will get into this more, probably begins in the 1930s, post-World War I, and the Great Depression, then grew during World War II, then flowered into the 1970s and beyond. It starts as a new form of architecture. I'll say a little bit more about that later. Then it invaded academic circles in English departments, philosophy departments, then finally into broader culture. The idea was, though, and I'll put it this simply, in World War I and World War II, how could the culture that had the best scientists, the best artists, the best philosophers create Nazism? How could they allow Hitler? How could they be responsible for the concentration camps? If you have enough reason, you create the good moral life, right? But no, with great reason, it didn't produce goodness. In fact, it allowed or created chaos and evil. Evil was allowed to flourish. That's why postmodernity came. Was a disillusionment with reason as solving all the problems of the world. Us being the locus and the center of life without God. Are you with me? Okay. So it starts with a deconstruction as a literary theory. Deconstruction comes out of structuralism. Language is a social construct, and people groups develop literary documents and texts in an attempt to provide meaning that will help them make sense out of the meaninglessness of their lives. Deconstructionists reject that meaning is inherent in the text itself. So meaning does not lie in this book. Every person that comes to the book and reads it comes with a history and a context, and they impose meaning into that. So every person that looks at the same text comes up with their own interpretation. My truth of 1 Corinthians 13, Kelly's truth of 1 Corinthians 13, Jim's truth of 1 Corinthians 13. There's not just truth in 1 Corinthians 13 on its own in the text. Truth in postmodernity, but coming out of modernity, is in the person that goes to the text. Do you see? And because the meaning of a text is dependent on the perspective of the one who enters into dialogue with it, it has as many meanings as it has readings and readers. So that's why we get my truth, your truth, and never the truth. So if you read any people like Derrida and Fish and Foucault and Rorty, they give up the search for truth and be content with interpretations from each person that comes to the text. All is different. There's no meta-narrative. There's no sweeping universal understanding of what is right. The world has no center, only differing viewpoints. So even the view that's on TV right now is not the view, the one view, but a certain view by certain women of a certain age and certain background at this week, right? It should just be a view. That's what's doing. And then Fox has their view, and then NBC has their view. But no one can look at, here's the one objective outside of us view in postmodernity. Now that's freeing. Everybody is empowered, and it's maddening because you can't put your foot down and say, this is solid. In the postmodern world, people are no longer concerned that knowledge is inherently good. There's no inevitable progress. Modernity was very optimistic. Another 100 years, and we're all going to be perfect as human beings. We're going to solve all problems. Poverty's going to be gone. Optimism is now pessimism. No longer every day in every way we are getting better. Millennials and Gen X and Gen Zs are worried they'll never have the standard of living that their parents had before them. Not confident that humanity will be able to solve the world's problems or even that their economic situation will be better than their parents. There are other equally valid paths to knowledge besides reason, like emotion and intuition. Reason didn't do it. Maybe emotion will. Maybe intuition will. There's no absolute truth in postmodernity. Rather, truth is relative to the community in which you participate. Or if you're an individual, I am the locus of my truth. That's why you hear people talking a lot today, my truth. Centerless, relativistic, pluralistic, to each his own. Everyone has the right to his or her opinion. Who am I to question what you think? And don't believe reason can solve the problems. Because of World War II, because of Nazi Holocaust, because of the Auschwitz, because of atomic bomb, because of Hiroshima, because of apartheid, because of Watergate, because of Marxism, because of socialism, because of Stalinism, because of Leninism, and on, all thought that they were on the right side of history. And reason failed to deliver a morality suited to the real world in which we live. So there's great disillusionment in the postmodern view of life. What does that look like in some things? Well, like in art, it's collages, not a realistic portrait of something. It's more impressionism, or a collage, a variety of things that are equally valid in a picture, that intersect many styles and pictures in one, but not one theme. I was trying to think of a movie that gets at this. This is a little dated, but my wife, whenever it comes on, she watches Valentine's Day. Do you know that movie? Where a bunch of young adults have different stories that near the end intersect and none of them resolve. There's not a happy ever after and everybody goes off in love or married or at peace or content. Their lives are in chaos. You watch them, they come together, they're still in chaos, and when the movie ends, it's still chaos. That's postmodernity. It is in the, if you're into any of the Marvel universe and those different things, it used to be all the different superheroes came together and they fought evil and they won. Have you noticed over the last few years, the Marvel universes and those things are Batman versus Superman? It is Marvel Civil War. It is Spider-Man, I talked about it last Christmas, No Way Home. Spider-Man, why can't Spider-Man get home? He should be able to get home. Postmodernity says, we can't get home. We're not going to get home. Okay, now if we go to the illustration that I gave before of modernity with the initial Star Trek, the original Star Trek Second Generation series in broad strokes. The crew is even more diverse, including other species than human from other parts of the galaxy, and Spock is replaced by Data. But Data is an android, not a human, and he's not happy just being an android. He's more rational in one sense. He's a machine, but he wants to be human. And he wants to be human because he knows he's incomplete. He lacks a sense of humor. He lacks emotion. He lacks the ability to dream. He lacks the ability to love. Postmodernity cares more about those things than reason. Do you see? So Spock, reason was king. Data, he's got everything Spock had and more, but he's not content. He's incomplete. His creator did not program that in. Actually, one of the heroes in the next generation, the second generation of Star Trek, is the empath Counselor Troy. right? Skilled in intuition, a woman who can perceive the hidden feelings and motives of others. Rational is not always to be trusted. What people say, what people tell you, what you see is not always reality. She can say, he's saying all the right things. He looks good. He's evil. I've got a bad feeling about this. And whoever's the captain takes her impression very seriously. You can't trust what reason tells you you should be able to trust. And interestingly, the original Star Trek generally ignored questions of God and the supernatural and religious belief. Next Generation, though, shows some interest in the supernatural embodied in the strange character Q. You know, that guy that shows up every once in a while. He's omniscient, he's omnipotent, but he's morally ambiguous. He's benevolent at times, and then he's selfish like a Roman mythology Greek god at other times. And he plays with the humans sometimes just because he's bored. So there's supernatural is acknowledged, where in the modernity it was not, and in the original series it was not. But we don't really know what to do with God. And if there's a God, God isn't necessarily good or for us. God will play with us, perhaps. Okay, let me come up with some illustrations. So if we've got more modernity here, and if we've got postmodernity here, let me put some illustrations, and then we'll start talking. The president of the seminary that I attended, when I attended, was a guy named Tom Gillespie. And I remember one of the lectures he gave when I was at school, and he said, under modernity, the world was like a circus, and in the center of the circus is the ringmaster, and the ringmaster says when the different people are going to come through. The elephants are going to come through, then the clowns are going to come through, and then the walking on top of a ball bear will come through, and then the juggler will come through. Everything happens from the center ring. There's organization and reason, and you can follow it all from there. There's order, there is control, it is clear and ordered, and everything can be followed if you look to the center ring. Postmodernity is like going to a carnival, where there is a midway down the middle, and then tents on the left and the right side, and there's a barker at every tent inviting you come in to see the woman with 100 tattoos and the boy who's got, or the little girl who's got a mustache, and reptiles that are this, and they'll scare you in this place, and someone else comes in and I'll tell your fortune in this place, and postmodernity is a world that's like a carnival, not a circus. Now, what Gillespie contended, though, with a carnival, all tents are equal in value, all have the right to exist and to try to persuade, but there's no special status. But what Gillespie would say is a carnival is very much like what the first century AD was when Jesus walked the earth, and when Paul was going on his missionary journeys to the different cities to try to share the gospel. There were all kinds of other gods. There were all kinds of other philosophies. There were all kinds of understandings. Christianity and the good news was one among many, but when it was shared, it convinced, not only intellectually but emotionally, many to follow, and it has now 3 billion people in the world who would identify themselves as followers of Jesus Christ. So even when we used to be in a circus, where in some times when we were in league with Rome, or in the 1950s, 60s, 70s in the United States under Christendom, we were in league with power. We knew what the ringmaster was doing, and we could tell the ringmaster what to say and do in some respects, or we were the ringmaster. The church rarely has done well as the ringmaster of the circus. We've lost our deep identity in Christ. We've been very surface. We've been co-opted by power. We've done horrible things in the name of God when we've been circus masters. We've done best when we've been marginalized. We've done best around the world when we've been under suffering. We've done best where we were one among many, but actually we're talking about something that we were living, and there was better congruencies of our talk and our walk. And Gillespie says, moving from modernity to postmodernity, you have to know what's going on, but being in postmodernity is not that bad of a place. The first century lived in postmodernity. And we're returning to that now in the 21st century. Okay, so look at Acts 17, where Paul has been run out of Philippi. He was jailed and run out of there. He was in Thessaloniki for a while. He's run out of there. They send him ahead to Athens, and he walks around, and he does a modernity thing. He sets up shop at the Areopagus, and he gives a speech about Jesus. And he gets enough interest from the intellectuals of Athens that they invite him into debates. But a few are convinced. He's able to make a modern argument to modern people at that time. Many scoff, and then many say, we'll talk to you in a week. He tries to do some postmodern things where he says, I've walked around your town, and you have many gods here. There's one of them that has a placard on the bottom of it says, to an unknown God. I want to tell you about the God that you've named unknown, and it's really Jesus, the Savior and Lord. And then he says, you have a poem that says such and such and such. That poem is only fulfilled in Jesus Christ. So he does some post-modernity stuff in the middle of the modernity stuff, but he's in a place where it's more carnival-like, but in the seat of intellectual curiosity, Athens, so he has to do some modernity. And so we, in the 21st century, there's still the shadow, and many people care about modernity, but many people are past modernity into post-modernity. So we have to have some fluency in both worlds and find out where people are. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay. Second would be, well, let me put this. On everybody's table is this sheet from InterVarsity. A couple weeks ago when I preached, if you were in the service, I talked about this a little bit. InterVarsity, when a guy named Doug Shoup was a student, I think he was at Pepperdine, he became a Christian because some Christians gave him C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. He had questions and obstacles about the faith. He read Mere Christianity. And because he was a modern, thinking that if his modern questions got answered, then he could have faith in Jesus, he became a Christian. And when he came back to InterVarsity and started to work with college students as he became older and older, some still responded well to the question, is the faith true? Especially those people who are boomers, born between 1946 and 1964. That's a main question of those. So it's the modernity question. Is it true? The question before that, it doesn't go back there because they're dealing with college students, is the builder question, which I think is it my duty? The greatest generation, if the government said, you need to go to war in World War I or World War II against Hitler because he's evil and we need to face evil, they said, okay. If the parents said, this is the right way to work, if the pastor said, do this, generally, builders, the greatest generation said, is it my duty? That they would do it. Boomers, 1946 to 1964, is it true? That's the modernity question. The next three questions move us closer and closer to postmodernity. Okay? So those born generally from 1965 to 1979, it's not that they don't care about is it true, they do, they just don't think that either we can answer that, there's not one truth, there's just a myriad of truths, but do you have something real? If it's true but not real, it doesn't make any difference. But if it's real, if it's living, if it's breathing, then I might be interested in it. The millennials 1980 to 1996 is not just, is it real or is it true, but is it good? If I committed to it, does it produce positive fruit in my life or in the life of the world? Does it create more justice? Does it create, does it free people? Does it give people joy? Those kind of questions. Is it good? And then Gen Z, the question they think InterVarsity from their vast surveying, 1997 to 2015, these are some of your kids or grandkids, is it beautiful? Many places in the world is such an ugly place. We've devastated the land or we've broken it. So that's why climate change and green initiatives are so important for our youngest people is they care about the planet. And they want to know, is what I'm committed to going to create beauty? It's not that they don't care at all about is it true, but that's not the question. Do you have something real? Is it good? Is it beautiful? Okay, so now if that's a reality, and the last three are more postmodern questions, and the first one, is it true, is the modernity question, then how do we as Christians talk to someone who's young and talk to them about the goodness or the beauty or the attractiveness of the faith? So a writer that I like very much is a guy named Alistair McGrath. He teaches in England. This is a book called Intellectuals Don't Need God and Other Modern Myths. Brilliant theologian, brilliant philosophical thinker, but he's written a lot of books putting very difficult concepts like the Trinity or Christ's death on the cross and what it means for us into common language for lay people. And he's very illustration-based, story-based, narrative-based. He'll make a great argument, the modernity argument, but then often he'll make a more narrative argument. So in postmodernity, postmoderns are interested more in narratives than arguments, stories. And interestingly, Jesus was the greatest storyteller that ever lived. He preached mostly in parables. Who am I? Why am I here? Can I make a difference? Neither science nor reason can answer those questions. Yet unless they're answered, life is potentially meaningless. So scientific theories cannot be said to explain the world, only the phenomena which are observed within the world. They don't explain things outside the world or the purpose behind the world. A theory has to predict to be scientific, to be repeatable. But what if you can't repeat things like God or a miracle or love? Then you have to tell stories. You have to have narrative. So in this book, Intellectuals Don't Need God, page 177, a philosopher from Princeton Seminary named Diogenes Allen summarizes the development from modernity to postmodernity. In a postmodern world, Christianity is intellectually relevant, still can answer the modern question. It is relevant to the fundamental questions, why does the world exist and why does it have its present order rather than another? But it is relevant to the discussion of the foundation of morality in society, especially on the significance of human beings. We have value. We're created in the image of God. Science can't tell you that a human has value and created in the image of God. Faith can tell that. Genesis 1 tells that. Jesus dying on the cross for everyone in the world gives value to every human being. We're in the same problem because of sin, and we have the great elevation of Christ dying and being raised for the entire human race. The recognition that Christianity is relevant to our entire society and relevant not only to the heart but to the mind as well is a major change in our cultural situation. So he does an illustration in 49 to 51. So if you're talking to someone who might be modern but is more postmodern, how do you talk to them about faith? Is faith something that you intellectually, well, there is a God from mere Christianity, and so just believe in him. If we can prove that there's a God, which you can't prove that there's a God or that there's not a God, but if you could, then people would believe. That's the modern answer. But in postmodernity, how do you talk about faith? So Alistair McGrath would say one way to talk to postmoderns about faith is as trust. They understand that you can trust certain people and you can't trust other people. So if there's a God, is God trustworthy? And here's his illustration. When I say that I believe in the promises of God, I'm declaring that I trust in them. It's more than a recognition that these promises exist. It's an awareness that they can be trusted and relied on. Faith is not something purely intellectual, enlightening the mind while leaving the heart untouched. Faith is the response of our whole person to the person of God. Now here's his illustration. An analogy may make this point clear. A story, a narrative. Consider a bottle of penicillin. He's from England, where penicillin was discovered. The antibiotic responsible for saving the lives of countless individuals who would otherwise have died from various forms of blood poisoning. Imagine that this bottle is sitting on my bedside table and that A, I'm suffering from blood poisoning. What are my options? See how there's some modernity in here, and then there's the narrative story, postmodernity. I may accept that this bottle of penicillin exists. 2, I may trust that it's capable of curing my illness, which otherwise will probably kill me, but I shall never cure my blood poisoning unless I act upon that trust and take the penicillin. If I do not, I'll die. But having failed to benefit at all from the resource which could have saved my life. It's the third element of faith that's of special relevance to the postmodern, actually taking the penicillin. So it's making a modernity argument. Do you see how there's a reason to it? But then as a story, people can see a penicillin bottle. They can know if I'm sick. They experience or feel that. And they know if it's there but I don't take it, I'm not better. Or right now, it's freezing cold in Houston to many of you. Sherry said when she was at school today, some of the kids had jackets on and hats and some gloves because it was 50 this morning. If you're cold and I offer you my coat, but you don't put it on, does it help you? No. That's a story that you can see. Only if you put it on does it become effective in your life. That's a different argument than faith as, here's how I can explain the fibers in a coat and how you should know that a coat exists. If you know that a coat exists, I'm done with my argument with you. No, the coat only matters if you wear it. So that's where the postmodern can use stories, narrative, parables to get at things. Okay, here's another illustration. Back to Martin Luther. He was pre-modern in that he was during the Dark Ages. The Reformation led into the Enlightenment and then the Renaissance. But here's Martin Luther talking about what it means to be united to Christ. Faith unites the soul with Christ as a bride is united with her bridegroom. That's an image, that's a story, that's a narrative. By this mystery, as the apostle teaches us, Christ and the soul become one flesh, Ephesians 5:31-32. And if they're one flesh, and there's between them a true marriage, indeed, the most perfect of all marriages, since human marriages are but poor examples of this one true marriage, it follows that everything that they have, they hold in common, the good as well as the evil, according to the believing soul, can boast of and glory in whatever Christ possesses as though it were his or her own, and whatever the soul has, Christ claims as his own. Let us compare these, and we shall see inestimable benefits. Christ is full of grace, life, and salvation. My soul is full of sins, death, and damnation. Now let faith come between them, and sins, death, and damnation will be Christ's in marriage, while grace, life, and salvation will be the soul's. That's a story. That's not an argument. I mean, there's an argument in it, but it's a narrative. People know about marriage. They know about the image of marriage. If I come into the marriage with a lot of debt and Sherry didn't have any debt, she takes on my debt in marriage. I got her beauty, she got this. You know, that was what marriage was. And Luther plays off that to talk about what it means to be united to Christ. Okay? Okay, let me go to one other thing. You ask this question to a modern, is Nazism a good thing? How do you think, if we're to dialogue, how do you think a modern might try to answer that question? Is Nazism a good thing? Using reason or science to try to explain that. Well, 6 million Jews and others were exterminated. Might not be a good thing for them if you're Jewish. How Martin Luther King tried to explain that question of equality with his letters from a Birmingham jail was he cites Augustine and Thomas Aquinas to argue that human laws are only just when they square with moral law and the law of God, which is the eternal law. That's a rational argument, right? He's still operating under modernity in the 60s, which is kind of the end of that time. Here's how a postmodern would try to get at if someone has done a sin or if something is unjust. If you go to 2 Samuel 12, 1 through 7. So in 2 Samuel 11, David has committed adultery with Bathsheba. And when he finds out that Bathsheba is married to Uriah the Hittite, he tells his general to put Uriah in the worst fighting so he'll be killed. Everybody will pull back and he dies. Here's what the prophet Nathan says to the King David. It is not a modernity argument. It's a postmodern argument. Here's what he says. Let me see where I can find it. The Lord sent Nathan to David. He came to him and said to him, there were 2 men in a certain city, and one was rich and one was poor. Tells a story. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. He brought it up, and it grew up with him and with his children, and it used to eat of his meager fare and drink from his cup and lie in his bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man, and he was loath to take one of his own flock or herd to prepare for the wayfarer who had come to him, but he took the poor man's lamb and prepared that for the guest who had come to him. Then David's anger was greatly kindled against the man. He said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who's done this deserves to die. He shall restore the lamb fourfold because he did this thing and because he had no pity. Nathan said to David, you're the man. He doesn't use reason to convince him he's the man. He doesn't use modern arguments, science to do it. He uses a story. I anointed you king over Israel. I rescued you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house, your master's wives into your bosom. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that had been too little, I would have added as much more. Why have you despised the word of the Lord to do what is evil in his sight? You've struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and have taken his wife to be your wife and have killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house, for you've despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Postmodern argument. If the Old and the New Testament can use postmodern arguments to talk to people about justice and about faith, then we can today. Final thing, and then I'll just open it up. Postmodernity is about deconstructing things, saying how what came before is wrong. Modernity, reason didn't solve things, so we can't rely on reason. The problem with deconstruction often is you never stop deconstructing, and in the end, it eats itself. Because if you're the only thing left, then you have to deconstruct what remains. So here's a modern example of a deconstructive, an argument of deconstruction that then gets deconstructed. Tim Keller tells this story about him talking in a gathering in New York City about Jesus being the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. And he talked about the exclusivity of Jesus Christ. There's not many paths up the same mountain. There's only one path, and it's Jesus Christ. He gets done, and there's a question and answer time, and someone stands up and says, that is so exclusivistic. I reject that premise. There is not one the truth. There's only your truth, and then I have a different truth, and everybody else in this room has a different truth. I reject it, and I'm going to convince everybody else that that's wrong. Okay, that's the postmodern answer to a biblical truth claim. Do you know what Keller's answer was? You've said, I am exclusive, but then your response is, there is no truth. I know it's right, and I'm going to convince everybody that my truth is correct. That's just as exclusive as the statement I just made. Everybody makes exclusive claims. If you're making a postmodern claim that you're wrong, you can't make a modern claim that you're right. You can't make a claim that I'm wrong and then say, you're right. Everybody's got to be equally wrong or equally right in postmodernity when you deconstruct everything. And so Keller just said, you're making just as an exclusive claim as I am, you just don't realize you are. See what I'm saying? Okay, so how do you deal, my final comment, which is probably, you're glad it's going to be done. So if modernity says truth is absolute and postmodernity says everything is relative, do we have to pick one or the other, or is there a third way? The Christian faith would say there is a third way. Truth is not primarily absolute, although there is truth, and it's not just relative. Truth is a person. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Truth is a relationship, a story that your life can enter into. You can bring your story, broken that it is, into this grander story and find healing for your wound and shame and new life through that life. Christianity is not just a correct set of facts, that's modernity. It is the person Jesus Christ. And we're invited into bringing what's up there, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, to give us purpose and meaning where postmodernity doesn't have hope and is not optimistic. The Christian faith as a third way is. Okay. Let's discuss. React to what I said or didn't say, or what in the chapter you had questions about. What do you want to talk about? Catherine?
Okay, this might be my not understanding it fully, but it seems to me, in my little tiny view, that in a way, postmoderns might embrace Christianity more holistically than the generation before them. Whereas as moderns tended to engage more with their head, with theology, etc.,
Yeah.
they're actually interested in the relationship and moving forward with perhaps all the parts, or is that just a...
Well, I mean, they'll start at least, they'll lead with their heart.
Okay.
And then can they get to the head? One other illustration that I didn't share, but I have, in Waco is Chip and Joanna Gaines, the, what's the name of their show before? And now they have a whole network. Fixer Upper, yeah. And so she was kind of eclectic chic. So there was modern touches, so black steel and then the cabling, but then it would be farmhouse. And so very postmodern, a combining of different things. But in true postmodern architecture, you'll have like 15 different styles that you think, wow, that suits my eye and I really like it, but somebody else might say, that's the ugliest house that I've ever seen. And someone might even, in true postmodernity, they might have a staircase that doesn't go to a room. It's just a staircase. But at the end of the day, you might say to a postmodern, tell me about your vision for this house or this building, and they'll explain it to you, and they'll have great explanation rationally, or they'll have, this makes me feel good, or this is beautiful. And then where you get to the modern question, or the question of foundation, is you say to them, so you can put a room over here that there's no stairway to on the second floor. You have to go through a rope on the outside. Yes, that's what you have to do. I just like that vision. And then if there's a fire, you can go out the rope. Or you have to climb up there. If a kid is in there, my grandkids will really enjoy that. You go, great, and say, I don't need any of the modernity, the old structure and regimented way to do architecture. But then you could say to that person, how do you do the foundation of the house? Oh, well, the foundation has to be what a foundation is, or the house won't be built. It has to be a slab of concrete that you build from. So there are some things, even in postmodern architecture, that are absolutes or givens. And so with the postmoderns, if they start with feelings and emotion and story, how do we help them know about foundations? And the ultimate foundation is Jesus Christ. So you've got to get ultimately to the intellectual or the head in that, if that, at least that makes sense to me. I can't see exactly, but Tracy, yeah.
Hi. Okay, I think I kind of understand, but could you explain a little bit more how this, the enormous weight of the World War II, the Nazism, it's incredible to me that all of this came about because of the heinous acts of World War II and World War I, and how that brought about not so much postmodernism, but how that brought about the specific instance of everyone bringing their own truth into the world. And that's where you specifically said everyone brings their own truth to text.
Yeah. Well, let me give another illustration. My dad, when he was alive, was a conservative Republican. My mother, who is still alive, is a liberal Democrat. And my mother gets up every day and she watches MSNBC 3 cycles in a row from 5:30 till like 7:30. And that gets her day going. And when she calls me every Saturday morning, she wants to talk about all that. 50 years ago, there was ABC, CBS, and NBC, and Walter Cronkite, you knew, was going to tell you the truth, you thought, if you liked Walter Cronkite. He graduated from University of Missouri Journalism School. The people that were in Missouri growing up thought, he's a good guy. I say to my mom, I don't watch the news. How can you be a responsible citizen? How can you be a Christian? I say, Mom, when we were leading up to the 2018 election and things got so divisive and Trump this and Obama that and Biden this, and then we were in the middle of the COVID stuff and everybody was arguing, Sherry and I Googled most reputable news sources. And they said, you have to check those sources to see what you think might be the most reputable. But they said Reuters, AP, and Wall Street Journal. And I told my mom, I have those 3 apps on my phone. And whenever I want to look at news through the day or find out things, I look at those. I don't sit through a talking head. I don't get either from the Fox standpoint, more the right slant, or the MSNBC perspective from the left. It's just too confusing. It's too exhausting. I just don't want to go through my day like that. So 50 years ago, under modernity, we had those 3 news sources, basically. And now we've got 100. And you can just be in an echo chamber just hearing what you want to hear, my truth, but it's so different than what my mom is hearing every morning is radically different than what those are that listen to Fox every morning. And radically different what I am looking at when I look at AP or Reuters or Wall Street Journal. So that's why if you take away the cataclysmic events, we just don't trust sources as being objective, even the objective sources. My mom will say, MSNBC always has conservative people on to give the other side. I said, I believe they do. But always as one point, and then there's going to be a rebuttal that they get the last word on. Same with Fox, and I'm not trying to get political here. I'm just trying to say, where do you find the truth with news right now? See, that's we are living solidly in postmodernity with that.
But how did the events, I just don't understand, and maybe you can't answer.
Well,
but
so
I
many
don't
times
understand
when
how-
we found out later that something that the objective source told us was true came back to not be true. You know, I might say this weekend, because I'm talking about Nehemiah and, opposition from the outside. This weekend is opposition from the inside. And we find out that when they're trying to build the wall and there's these people coming at them from the outside, inside, there's people taking advantage of some of the situation to make money off other Jews. And you go, really? During that critical time when everybody's struggling, when everybody's there to give, there's a certain segment that are just trying to take and get. And so Nehemiah has to go, he hears all this clamor, and then he goes to the source, he goes to the people, and he says, is this really happening? And they don't say anything. They can't counter it, it's true. And then he goes publicly and he says, this shouldn't be for these reasons, and then he corrects it. So he goes to them directly and tries to find out, which is a good thing for us to do, go to the source, to the person. And then we would say as Christians that we can trust Scripture, the inspired Word of God. We can trust what Jesus said, what He did. But it's tough. Yeah. I don't know if I got it at your answer at all, but... And any time that, Lauren, you have anything that you want to add to it, just jump in.
Go ahead. Let me just shout.
Okay.
No.
Oh, they want it for the recording, I guess.
That's simple. So this author makes me feel like
Are you talking about Sire?
I'm talking about Sire.
Okay,
I'm going
thank
go through his chapter,
Yes.
and it feels like he's describing a tribe, and then another tribe, and then another tribe, and all these tribes are warring with each other. Some of them are historical in that they existed, and maybe less so now or coming, but somehow that doesn't seem like a very useful construct. So my question really is, how do the tribes, which of them feel an obligation to propel and project their truth on everybody else?
That's a great question. And, who can align with other tribes that are similar in their worldview to accomplish things like the League of Nations or the UN or things like that? I mean, C.S. Lewis in his Mere Christianity would say, no matter what country you live in, anywhere in the world, if there's a line toward water and you walk up and cut the queue, everyone everywhere in the world knows that's wrong. That's not conditioned by locale. That's a universal truth. And so are there some things that we can universally name that are worthy of us rallying together on? We don't want mutual destruction by the planet. That's why we have nuclear treaties. Even among enemies, Russia, China, and the United States. Now, it's tentative truths. Reagan said, trust but verify, but enough people, moms and dads, and especially people who have been through war, say, war is not fun. Everybody usually loses a lot in war. We don't want to keep going through this again. How can we name some things that we can all get behind and sign them, and then be held accountable if we break them? And we're just having a harder time doing that with wider groups these days. I read something today, I'm not even sure what book I was reading, but someone was saying listening is such a rare and powerful thing that it's almost synonymous with love. And I don't think we're listening very well right now to our spouses, to our kids, to our parents. We're not trying to hear what pain they've gone through, or why do they have the perspective they do? What is propelling this seemingly radical position that they have to us? What's caused that? Something as simple in the counseling term is when people are destroying other people, hurting people hurt people. There's usually a profound wound that is causing them not to be so self-introspective or nasal-gazing that they can't see how what they do is negatively affecting you. So part of it is listening to people to find out what is their pain, and then are there shared pain points or shared hopes? Well, in most cultures, they'd say, wow, we have these dreams for our kids. Or we have dreams for our planet. We want our kids or grandkids to be here and have a planet in 500 years. Well, what would that require? What does the science tell us on that? And then what are we willing to commit to? And those are some of the accords they're trying to come up with either carbon neutral or carbon decreased or things like that. But I think that's what humans from the beginning have done after the fall. You've got Adam and Eve and then the breaking, so you've got between husband and wife, there's disunity, then parent and child. Between brother and brother, Cain kills Abel. And then you have with the building of the tower, the differentiation of languages. And then you have the Noah, and almost everybody in the earth is killed. And then there's the rainbow for a restart. And then we get the law, but the law we can't do it completely because our hearts are not changed. And then with Christ coming in, he can work on us from the inside out to help to give us a new heart and a mind to actually listen to somebody and care for them and love them and sacrifice for them like he did for us. And that's the hope, or the possibility of hope, I think. But what do other people think about that? How do tribes talk to each other? Either when some are modern and some are postmodern, or when they have different languages. How do we even attempt at commonality? It's a hard one, isn't it? Somebody put their hand up. Yeah, David?
I'm certainly don't want to answer that question.
You've moved on.
But we had begun talking about truth, and in reading the chapter on postmodernism, there was an emphasis on the philosopher Nietzsche.
Yes.
And Nietzsche said, what then is truth? Truths are illusions about which one has forgotten that this is what they are, metaphors which are worn out and without sensuous power. And there was an emphasis, it seemed like, on a kind of an atheistic view of postmodernism, which is real easy to counteract. But the view that you're given is kind of a Christian view of
Well, at the end, I'm trying to say, if we're Christians, how do we approach all these things?
Okay, well,
Yeah,
I'm getting a little confused about what is postmodernism. Where does truth lie when you're trying to describe what postmodernism is?
Well, modernity would say, I think, therefore I am. The locus of truth goes to the individual, and then it is in reason and science. But postmodernity says science and reason has not produced the moral just life. Look at Germany, look at World War II, look at Watergate, look at on and on and on. And so we can't rely on those anymore. So all we have is in the deconstruction of literature. When I look at a text, truth is not in the text only, but in me coming to the text with my background and understanding, you coming to the truth with your background and understanding. So as many people as come to that book is as many truths as there are. There is no objective, centered truth in the world, and there's no God.
You don't buy that?
Oh, no, I don't. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I disagree with the postmodern conclusion, or I wouldn't be a pastor, for sure.
Okay, well, but you gave Christ's examples of stories as a postmodern way to view things.
He was able to talk to a postmodern, he was able to use postmodern tools to convey the gospel, if that's the way.
Right.
I'm sorry if I was not good saying, here's modernity, here's postmodernity. Now, how do we as Christians approach this, and where in the Bible do they engage both of these sides? So that's what I was trying to do.
The text was trying to describe postmodernism, period.
Yes.
Not apologetics.
I was trying to do the translation at the end. And maybe you guys in your classes have just been, how can I intellectually understand this subject? But I thought another layer that we should do is try to wrestle with, how do we apply this? Or if this is the case, if this is what we're living under, with the InterVarsity people, if they're dealing with this as opposed to this, how do they change their methods to try to connect with people?
Thank you. That's a great approach, and I appreciate that.
I'm sorry if I wasn't clear enough in my third part of the conversation. Yeah.
Ooh, that was loud. Let me say that's not new to us. We've been talking about the meta-narrative of the Bible the whole time.
Yeah.
Like, it's being better storytellers, right? Like, how do we connect the whole story? This is not new. This approach of being good storytellers, of engaging the world, of answering people's questions, that's what Alf has been saying.
So Lauren, modernity would say the meta-narrative is science and reason.
Yeah.
Postmodernity would say there's no meta-narrative.
Yep.
There's only individual or tribal stories. Christianity would say, no. There's a grand story that can take up all these smaller stories because God created everything.
Yes.
Redeemed everything. The Spirit is involved in everything. And that's why Christianity has an answer to whether we're in modernity or postmodernity or anything else. That's the beauty of our tradition. Yeah. Yes. Okay.
On the chart there, I follow everything, but the Gen Xers, it's do you have something real as compared to the Boomers? Is it true? And by real, do you mean something approachable, something like with non-deistic, not a wandering off God, but one that could be personal? Because the difference between something real and something true is kind of subtle. So if you could expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, when we were in All Staff, I told a story about in the Bethlehem church where I came from before I was here. There was a man named Dwayne Dunham, who was the last CEO of Bethlehem Steel, and I met him when we went on a trip to Israel. His wife, Glenna, was one of our deacons. She was very involved, a quiet, humble servant of the church. Dwayne I'd not seen in church except for maybe Easter, Christmas. He was one of those Creasters, Christmas, Easter guys. And we're in Israel. We land in Tel Aviv. We get a hotel the night just above Tel Aviv. We drive up the Mediterranean coast to Caesarea Philippi, where Pilate had his resident. We see a stele that is in a museum, but there's an example of it says Pontius Pilate in Latin. So there's historical archaeological evidence that Pilate was here at the time of Jesus. They have archaeologically excavated where the harbor was there, and you have all these beautiful sites. We go inward, and where Elijah had a contest with the prophets of Baal on the top of this mountain. We're there, and I'm reading the text, and then we go into the valley where it talks in Revelation about Armageddon, the last battle. We drive through Mount Tabor, where maybe the transfiguration was. We're not sure what mountain that happened. It doesn't list it in the New Testament, but people assume it's Mount Tabor. And then we get to the Sea of Galilee, and we're on the Sea of Galilee. We're on a boat, and we're in the middle of the sea, and we shut off the engine. And I read from the Gospels where Jesus talks about the birds of the air. And I say that an interesting fact that in my research about this area, it's the Syro-Africa Rift Valley goes from Israel all the way into Africa. It's the lowest point on earth, and there's more species of birds here than any other place in the world. And then I read about Jesus saying, I know about the sparrows, and nothing is too minor for me, and you're more important than many sparrows. And I look over at Dwayne Dunham, the engineer who is the CEO of Bethlehem Steel, and he's weeping. And that night in a hotel buffet area with 5,000 other tourists, and we're eating, and I said, never hardly talked to him. Dwayne, I saw you were a little touched on the Sea of Galilee. Do you want to talk about that? And he says, Alf, you don't know the guilt and the shame I've been feeling the last several years having to shut down Bethlehem Steel. I went to the President of the United States and begged for them to subsidize like Obama did with the auto industry during the challenges, and they wouldn't do it. And I've got all kinds of explanations why we had to shut down. I mean, Germany and Japan were subsidizing the steel industries. We were a big operation. They had mini mills that got going, and on and on and on. But he said, I had not been going to church because I was so embarrassed. I didn't want the engineers, the white collar, the blue collar, the workers to see me. I didn't think I was a good Christian. I failed them. And I wondered, I really thought God couldn't love me. And we're in Israel, he says. And we're at Caesarea Philippi, and we're where Elijah was, and we're in the valley where Megiddo is, and we're at Mount Tabor where Jesus was transfigured, and we're on the Sea of Galilee, and you read the scripture that says, you are more precious than many birds. And I looked over the mountain and behind you, and there was this light, and I felt the presence of God invade me and say, you're loved. And that's what happened. And the faith was more than true. It was real. It was good. It was beautiful. He had something that happened to him, and the rest of the time I was in Bethlehem, regular worshiper, got involved. My son was playing soccer at Dickinson College, and he called me I'm passing through Dickinson. I just gave a lecture in Pittsburgh. Is your son around? What's his cell phone? I said, I think he's playing a game tonight. I'm going to go watch him play. Watched the game, and he took the team out to dinner. And he got his joy back. He got his hope back. He got his life back. He realized, he did the best he could in a very difficult situation as in the role he was in. And God was going to forgive any sins he had in that, if he had any. And God was going to give him hope going forward. He could have a second chance. And so I think that's kind of more than it just being, it's true, but it's in the gut. He felt it. He experienced it. Something happened on the Sea of Galilee for him. Does that make any sense, David?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I can't get all that on the sheet, but that was good. No, it really does.
See, and isn't that why stories often they can convey truth, and they can do more than convey truth. They can cover the modernity question and the postmodernity question. Yeah, yeah.
I think this is on. I remember when Moses was at the burning bush and he asked God who he was, and he said, I am whosoever I am. And it made me think about how people interpret who they are in this day and age. And Lorian's right. We're getting the whole story from beginning to end. And that feels so emboldening to me to know why we're made in his image, and that there are those stories, there are those comments that we can, that the Holy Spirit will bring to our minds, that we can have hope in.
That's great.
And I loved it that you said learning is love, because it relates to what you just said.
Yeah. I am who I am. I am who I will be. I am the God of Abraham, Jacob, Sarah, but I'm more than that. And then Jesus in the New Testament does these 7 I ams in John. I'm the bread of life. I'm the living water. I am continues. Jesus is the face of God. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father, Jesus says. So that's the amazing thing about the Christian faith. And if we can get people to look at the life, the teachings, the death and resurrection of Jesus, the person, that answers the modernity question, but also the postmodernity question, the relationship. We're so isolated and lonely, many of us, especially in our culture. They're looking for intimacy and relationship. Yeah, and that's where, in the next generation of Star Trek, is it Troy? What's her name? Yeah, Troy gets at that. Yeah, Catherine.
Sorry, this is probably not profound, but in our current culture, would it be accurate to say then that because their postmodernity doesn't necessarily like bring a lot of hope, because you've got what you've got, because your truth is your truth and it works or it doesn't work and you're stuck with it, that they are more likely to be impressed by someone else's authenticity and joy than maybe that would be an argument that would speak more loudly to this generation?
If they see something as real in someone else, has a good result in their marriage or in their work or whatever, and is beautiful, yes, I think so. And so if we don't know who we are, we're created in the image of God. Christ died for us. We have gifts from God. We have hope in eternity. Then we're going to have all these identity crises, and that's why we're having all these discussions right now about pronouns and about how I call ourselves. And, well, you must call me. I saw something on Twitter today that I am a ghost. That's who my identity is. Another person, I'm a cat. I'm a sheep. Not just I as a man say I'm a woman, or I'm a woman who say I'm a man, or those things, but all these other things. So if we don't have that figured out, we name that trying to find clarity. And we know internally, as broken human beings, we don't have all the truth inside of us. We need objective truth outside of us. We need a relationship to someone that does. And if someone doesn't have it all figured out but humbly says, well, I at least know I'm loved. I was created out of love, not out of need. I was created good. I have gifts. I'm broken, but I was not left bereft. The God of the universe joined me in the mess and then died for me, my sins. In the marriage image that Luther said, I get exchanged my bad stuff for God's perfection. And I take those on, and then the Spirit's within me to make me have a life that becomes more and more like Christ. And then I have hope of eternity. You don't have to, I was reading this morning early of 1 Thessalonians 4, do not grieve as those who have no hope. Christ died and rose. Because he died and rose, we have hope of resurrection as well. So that, if you're someone who has some of those things that a lot of people are asking, you're well ahead of the game. Now, you can't share that in a rigid, dogmatic, judgmental, mean-spirited way. That's the pushy thing that's turning people off, or people are leaving and deconstructing church or the faith because they had a bad experience of it, a bad representation of it. And some people will say to me as a pastor, well, I don't believe in God. Tell me about the God you don't believe. And they'll say that, a certain view of God, and I'll go, I don't believe in that God either. I agree with you. Well, how do you know what God is like? And I said, well, I'm convinced that God has revealed God's self through Scripture, through the Son, in dreams, in things, and then you talk about faith. So, yeah. And anything you'd cap off, Lorian? Someone that's taking a lot of these issues on in popular parlance is Rebecca McLaughlin. I've mentioned her a few times. She wrote Confronting Christianity, 12 Hard Questions for the World's Largest Religion. Is excellent. Then a children's version of this, really for junior high and high school, 10 questions every teen should ask and answer about Christianity, McLaughlin. And then when all the signs were in the yards of the secular creed engaging contemporary claims, it was the claims of 2-3 years ago. Here's the front page. What are the chapters? If I can find it. My big thumbs. Black Lives Matter, Love is Love, the gay rights movement is the new civil rights movement, women's rights are human rights, transgender women are women, calling to loving arms. She just engages the really hot button issues of the day in a caring way with stories, but then also with scripture and good theology. So she's somebody that kind of can help us navigate some of this right now. And then the book that I mentioned, in the midst of all the deconstruction, Gospel Coalition wrote this with about 10 different scholars who did a chapter, Before You Lose Your Faith, Deconstructing Doubt in the Church. So the popular thing right now is I'm deconstructing the faith, I'm leaving the Christian faith because this happened, and they're responding to that phenomenon. So. Yeah, just I'll leave them out here and. Can I? Yeah. Can I close this in prayer? Is that good? Let me close this in prayer. God, thank you for this time tonight together. May it not just have been an exploration of some head things, but may it be something that is relevant to our heart, our lives, our faith, how we know you and how we love you and how we follow you and then how we share you in a way that would be honoring to you and might have more people experience you, and all for your glory. In Christ's name, amen. Thanks, you guys.